You see, this is my life. It always will be. There's nothing else. Just us. And the cameras. And those wonderful people out there in the dark.
Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to Out There in the Dark. I'm Azed. Well, maybe I should say my full name, right? I'm thinking about just dropping the last name Majid and just going with Azed like Cher does, you know, like, or
Madonna,
or Lizzo, which I'm more in that camp.
The Weeknd.
The Weeknd. Well, I have no the Azed. I could be the Azed.
Perfect. You got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, here he comes. Who? The Azed's here. And with me, as always, is
Tom Alexander.
Look at how sweet and nice that rolls off the tongue.
Well, I designed it that way.
And zero shame in saying it too, which is surprising.
Pure confidence and denial.
Yeah, right. We'll talk about shame another time. But today we're gonna actually have a really good one. We have a sort of a, what do you call it? Like an homage episode, I guess, or a
tribute.
Tribute. That's the word I'm looking
Tribute.
for. Yeah. I shouldn't have smoked weed before we got on here.
Yes, you should have.
Yeah. And we're going to be talking about the great William Friedkin, who passed away, I think, in August.
I believe so.
And, just a really fascinating filmmaker. Made a few, like, absolutely classic films and a lot of, like, kind of in between. And then some real bad ones too.
But
right?
always interesting.
Yeah, he definitely had his own style, right? So let's talk a little bit about Billy Friedkin, as he always said, "Call me Billy," right? So this is a guy who started like in the '60s, in the early '60s, right?
Yep.
And I think I read somewhere that his first movie was actually, speaking of Cher. Was the Sonny and Cher movie called Good Times.
Yep.
Right?
Correct.
Which I've seen. I saw that when I was a kid. No, yeah. They used to play it on Sunday movies, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. And you don't understand how big Sonny and Cher was in the 70s. Like, they were like as big as Taylor Swift is now.
I think so.
Yeah. They were huge. Like, even for kids.
What about compared to Donnie and Marie?
Yeah, so Donnie and Marie, by the time we got to Donnie and Marie, we weren't into Donnie. Like, you have to be a little kid to like the Osmonds.
Right.
Like 8 to maybe 10, 11,
and
right?
Where does Captain and Tennille fit on this?
Yeah, well,
on the spectrum.
You know, like we there's, if you want to talk about the Captain and Tennille, then let's talk about Brian Wilson right after that. You know what I'm saying? Actually, the Captain was in the Beach Boys for a while.
Really?
The Captain from the Captain and Tennille.
Wow.
Yeah, he was in one of the iterations of the Beach Boys.
Wow, I learned something today.
That's why he had that sort of nautical themed act. Otherwise, you're just kind of like accepting it. Like the captain of what? Anyway, yes. So, and speaking of the 70s, Friedkin gets really big. I mean, we started off. He did the Sonny and Cher movie. I think he did
The Boys in the Band.
He did The Boys in the Band, which was notably like a very early LGBTQ film based on a play.
And not a filmmaker known for LGBT content in his career, but for like the late 60s.
He is known for it, but in a controversial way.
Right.
Right? Which we'll get to in a second. So after that, he does The Exorcist. French Connection.
Did the French Connection.
Right. So that was his big, huge breakthrough.
That was his big breakthrough. It was at the time he became the youngest director to ever at that time win the Oscar for Best Director.
Right.
I think he was the early 30s, 31 or something.
Yeah.
Although he was beaten by Damien Chazelle when he won the Oscar for La La Land.
That is a sad commentary on our whole society.
I like La La Land.
Okay, the show is over. It was already a slog to do it.
All right.
Okay.
Right.
No. So
yes.
Yeah. So back to the French Connection. So I mean, we can talk a little bit about The French Connection if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, I love this movie so much.
It's got a
I've probably
grittiness.
seen it more times than I've seen The Exorcist. Well, no, probably the same. It's got such a grittiness.
Yeah. That New York grittiness from 1970 or whatever, it's just amazing looking, right?
The anti-hero that, I think the Gene Hackman's Popeye Doyle character is a anti-hero that stands alongside those late 60s, early 70s, in Warren Beatty and Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Those Serpico, like those kind of tough cops who, are really problematic, and he certainly is throughout the film.
Yeah, of course, there's a difference, right? I mean, and this is true I think it's a through line with Friedkin's movies, is that his anti-heroes are really unlikable. Mm-hmm. Like they're like in all the other ones, it's like the anti-hero, you kind of like them because they're like fighting the system.
Maybe it's Bogart
or it's like Al Pacino or whatever, right? Like Serpico, you love Serpico, because he's doing it for the right reason. He's an anti-hero against the system, whereas Friedkin has a much darker view of humanity in many ways, and so there's hardly ever good guys in his movies, right?
I think about the end of The French Connection.
Yeah.
When Popeye Doyle accidentally shoots the other cop and doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
Walks away.
Yeah.
To keep looking for the frog, as they call him.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. Like the Popeye Doyle character is like a relentless, one-track minded, borderline sociopath, right? So
because the backstory is that he had, because of a screw up he made, he ended up getting another cop killed.
Yeah.
And but what a relentless, but much like Friedkin's film, it is relentless.
Yeah, and it's very famous for its chase scene, right?
It's got one of the greatest chase scenes in cinema history.
And he only maybe topped by another Friedkin movie, which is To Live and Die in L.A.
That was
incredible. Great chase, insane, right? I'm like watching it, and as a filmmaker, I'm going, I don't know how the hell did he get those shots on the highway, So French Connection wins big, like becomes
big
a huge,
Oscars,
Oscars. Gene Hackman, the film wins Best Picture, right? So he becomes this big deal, and then his next movie, of course, is
The Exorcist.
Yes,
which
that's a whole
becomes the biggest deal on the entire platform.
Yeah, which we'll get into because in the second part of this show, we're going to basically be focusing on The Exorcist. So we'll just continue on with his career because it's interesting what happens with him, right? After The Exorcist and The French Connection. Now, this is like the most sought after director of all time. He has basically like carte blanche to do whatever he wants. And he chooses to do the movie he does next is Sorcerer. And that is one of those like Heaven's Gate and, those late 70s disaster, where it's like it tanked his entire career. Because people really hated it when it came out, and it's weird because it's a really good movie. It's really interesting and it's really harrowing.
I haven't seen it in a very long time, and but I remember liking it when I was a teenager.
Well, yeah, and
I thought it was really, really gripping and intense.
And it has that same, gritty kind of like because the opening is your
feels all sweaty.
Yeah. Roy Scheider is like constantly sweaty and. You get the backstory of these four sort of main characters, right? And I don't understand why it wouldn't have gotten, more attention because it's as an action film, it's really, really gripping, right?
Do you think maybe it had because it was compared unfavorably to the film it was a remake of, The Wages of Fear?
I don't know. I know that it was
which is a pretty great film.
Yeah, that's by Clouseau, right?
Yeah.
I like Wages of Fear too a lot, but that's it's not Sorcerer is different. It's a lot darker and you don't feel anything for the characters as much. Like there's a distance in that one. I think it's a fascinating movie.
Clouseau's films have a distance.
They do, but you because it has what's his name in it, who's like a lead guy, the French actor. He's kind of like super famous.
Yves Montand,
exactly. He's like so it has Yves Montand in it, and he's immediately somebody you like. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or he's relatable. Whereas Roy Scheider is like, what? The guy from Jaws, what the fuck? I heard also that like Sorcerer came out the same month or something as Star Wars.
Oh.
And it was like, forget it. Like you're gone.
That's the same problem that Blade Runner and The Thing in 1982 had coming out in the same month as E.T.
Oh, right. Okay,
so
interesting.
Those are also two films that were bombs critically and commercially when they came out, but have been greatly reappraised over the years as being masterpieces.
Yeah.
And similarly, Sorcerer has also been greatly reappraised as being
I mean, not as highly as something like Blade Runner, because it's not everybody's cup of tea, I guess. But, but yes, definitely it's gotten a lot more critical acclaim, right?
Mm-hmm. But yeah, going against Star Wars.
Yeah. And apparently, like, he was very, very devastated, Friedkin. I read a bunch of interviews and stuff, right? And just researching for this show. So, he was devastated. Like, he went into a really deep depression, and, he couldn't get hired after that. Like, basically, whatever. So I think the next movie he does after that is Cruising. Right.
Well, he did a comedy called The Brink's Job.
Oh yeah, with Peter Falk, right?
Peter Falk.
Yeah.
And
I haven't that one. I haven't seen.
No, me neither.
Yeah.
But then Cruising became a huge controversy.
Yeah. So then
he
did Cruising. Yes, and it's like all about this serial killer in the New York underground gay scene, and it was I remember, I was old enough to remember when this came out and how much. There was a lot of protests. Like by that point, the gay community had much more of a voice in mainstream media, right? So you were seeing this a lot. And it's interesting because when I've seen the movie now a couple of times, right? And I don't know, I'm half and half, I don't think I think by 1980 standards, I totally agree with the protesters, right?
Right.
It was like, hey, like, it was too subtle in a way, in its sort of, it was very authentic in some ways, and it was very sympathetic to the gay community, but in a way I think that was not empowering,
Okay. I have not seen it.
Oh, you haven't seen it?
I haven't.
It's interesting because at first it seems exactly like what people are saying. It's like, oh, you're always representing it as perverted and murders and blah blah blah, right? So it's a negative thing, but when you get into the story, it's not about that really, right?
It's interesting because here in Toronto, we had our own serial killer who was
oh yeah,
gay community, which is
terrifying. yeah. Oh, that was awful.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think it's a deeper movie in many ways. I think it has a lot more to do with the Al Pacino character and his own thing. Anyway, it's an interesting movie, but yeah, that one also did not do him any favors in terms of his reputation, right? I don't know what. I can't even remember what happened after Cruising with his career. He
did The Deal of the Century, which actually I do remember seeing.
Is that Chevy Chase?
Chevy Chase, Gregory Hines, and Sigourney Weaver.
Yeah, I think I've seen it too.
I don't think we need to talk about.
Yeah, I think that's one of those, like, this guy needs money now, right?
And then a couple years later, he did To Live and Die in L.A.
Okay, now this was a kind of return to form because I rewatched it like I think last week, just in anticipation of the show. So. But yeah, wow, it's a really good movie. Maybe except for the Wang Chung soundtrack, but but even that kind of fits, But yeah, it's a bizarre movie. Like it's so much of, like, we should do a whole show on that one. It's very
okay.
It's very, like,
I haven't seen it for quite some time. I do remember it being pretty. It had a great 80s aesthetic, and it was
100%
incredible freeway car chase.
Incredible that, and great young, like, beautiful Willem Dafoe,
William Peterson,
who was big. It was like the guy of the
big then.
Yeah, he was the '80s guy. Yeah, and he was actually really great. Like, he had a very understated style of acting. Like, he was like a tightly coiled guy.
He's
almost
excellent in Manhunter. And to be honest, I thought he was really good on CSI.
I never saw CSI, but is that where he landed? Like,
so CSI, yeah, that was his.
That's where he got
long
super
standing.
Okay. So he's fine. He's a trillionaire.
He's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's a really, really good one. And after that,
seems a lot of
he
The
did
Guardian.
Oh, that one was like
Terrible.
really bad. That's about the tree. That's like haunted tree in the backyard, right?
Something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And then
he did Bug.
Yeah, he started working with Tracy Letts,
Letts.
the writer, right? So he did Bug and he did Killer Joe.
Killer Joe, which was great. I love that movie.
Yeah. I don't know if I love it, but it's the only time I've seen somebody give deep throat to a chicken leg, a KFC chicken leg. So that was
me, funny enough.
Oh, wow.
I forget where I was. It was a lot to drink. Yeah.
Really? Is there a way for me to exit from here? Because
never.
Yeah? Okay.
Never.
Yeah. Starting to feel a bit. If anybody's out there, please. Yeah, so I think he basically just went forward. I can't remember what else he did after that. I think the last thing he did was the Kane Mutiny court-martial thing, which I haven't seen.
Which just came out on streaming,
Yeah, so I don't know if that's going to be whatever.
I've heard it's very good. But
it's a weird ending to that guy's career.
It's kind of anticlimactic in a way, but,
But I like the Kane Mutiny, so, maybe he did a good job with it. But it looks a little standard to me. It's interesting,
though. Well, it was made for streaming, I think. There was never an intention for it to get a theatrical.
Yeah, I think he does have a lot. I don't know whether I've watched quite a few of his movies now in the last little while. So I've noticed this thing where he likes to do plays and he also likes to stay in one location a lot, right? There's a stagey quality where everything's like, even in Killer Joe, they're in that cabin, they're in their trailer for a lot of the movie, right?
And I think you can say the same about The Exorcist.
You're in her bedroom,
the bedroom or the house.
Absolutely, and same with Sorcerer. You're in the trucks, right?
French Connection has opened up quite a bit. That one,
but yeah, there's a claustrophobia to his sets, even the outdoor sets, like because of the griminess or the way it's shot. I think
a lot of the framing, like when
he does a flat framing,
when you think about the car chase in the French Connection and Gene Hackman, for those who live under a rock and have no idea what I'm talking about, Gene Hackman is chasing a subway train, but in a car, so it's an elevated track in New York. And much of the framing is either Hackman tightly in the car, or the car, but it's tightly.
Yeah, it's framed, a lateral.
It's framed by the tracks, but so the train is above and the car is below.
Right.
And then the whole thing is incredibly intense, and the way Friedkin shot it, which was illegal, was basically just drive through the streets. He didn't get a permit, and he risked life and limb with Gene Hackman in the car.
They almost died in that.
Crazy.
Yeah, because he was following because there's a lateral shot too, like side shot.
So you had the car following.
They were going like 80 miles an hour apparently.
Yeah,
and it's like full of like traffic and stuff. It's like a real super guerrilla filmmaking kind of thing, and you feel it too.
It's super intense.
Yeah,
it's great.
Yeah,
but and then of
I
course
peed my pants.
Oh, yeah. Did you? Okay.
Right now, I mean, not during the movie.
Right. Yeah. Thanks. Okay. I'll get them up.
No.
And
you will? Okay.
Well, you got to clean it up.
So I mean, I got to clean it up.
I'll get the mop.
Well.
But then the cat.
You can't make me clean it up. There's nothing I can.
try to contribute.
He's trying to make a point about it.
And then it's claustrophobic because it goes back into the subway car where the killer is basically killed the driver.
Right.
And it's all racing to oblivion. And it's incredible.
And then
the editing is unbelievable through this entire film. I think.
Well, I know the chase scene is kind of like the actual. It's the centerpiece of the entire movie, right?
Yeah.
Because it goes on for so long outside of the car, and then in the subway, and then up the stairs. But
there's quite a few good set pieces in the film.
Yeah. So that's a basic overview. Now, he was a controversial director. He's kind of a tough guy persona too, right? Like old school,
very no nonsense.
Yeah. He's like a guy from the streets almost, but like from the 50s, like.
Yeah, well, and controversial filmmaking methods. I mean, he was not that well liked on set. I don't think for example, we just talked about the French Connection car chase, which was dangerous.
Yeah,
and certainly during the filming of The Exorcist, there's a story about how there's a scene where Regan uses her powers to throw Ellen Burstyn back against a wall.
Yeah.
And so the way they did the effect is they had a stunt person with a rope attached to her back would pull it. And then on one take, she complained that it hurt her back, and she asked Friedkin to please don't go so hard. So he turned to the stagehand and
Give
said,
it all you
go
got.
harder. And it permanently injured Ellen Burstyn's back.
Yeah.
You know, and but you know, a lot of actors worked with him multiple times and enjoyed him. Linda Blair has gone on record saying she loved working with Friedkin. She loved working on The Exorcist.
Yeah.
Because it was quite controversial that you had this 13, 14-year-old girl going through all this stuff. But for most of the really rough scenes that she goes through in The Exorcist, it wasn't her. It was another actor, an adult.
Yeah, she definitely was, privy to a lot of, that would not happen today, right?
You could not make The Exorcist
today.
today.
No. Because, no matter what we think, I'm sure it was a traumatic thing for her in some ways, right?
She's gone on record saying it was not traumatic. It looks like it was from the filmmaking, but she said she had a blast.
Right. But is she like an evangelical Christian now or something? Who knows?
I don't know. I don't think so.
She's like, she could be like
she's still brainwashed. Yeah.
She's still exactly. Okay. So anything else to say about just the career or the...
Well, he's such a film buff too. Like, this guy's a guy who really loves cinema. And so in interviews and things, he's always talking very passionately about, old Hollywood. And I think he fits right into that milieu.
Yeah. And I really, actually, this is one thing I was going to say. I wanted to talk a little bit about just him as a person, because he's a fascinating kind of character. He's like a character in a movie himself, right? And I read that he actually never finished high school.
Oh, wow.
So he was an autodidact, right?
Right.
Self-taught, basically. And but he was really smart and whatever. But he had that mix, and I really like it. He's like a regular guy, kind of bit of a boor, can be kind of
be
arrogant.
Exactly.
But ultimately a kind of likable guy, but kind of funny. But he's also really intellectual, because, his references, the movies he likes, the books he talks about. He did direct some operas, some stuff like that. So he's got that neat balance of the low and the high, and in his very character. And I think that in many ways is in his movies, right?
Yeah, because it's he does so many genre films.
Yeah,
they're
he's all over it.
High level work.
Well, exactly. He does all of his movies are really enjoyable to watch, even the shit ones, right? Because he's a great storyteller, right? He knows how to tell a story, but then he always does something weird in there, because he's also really influenced by French New Wave, and wanting to do something to fuck with the narrative, right? Even in something like To Live and Die in L.A., the main character dies, half an hour before the movie's over.
Yeah.
It's what? You don't do that. I know that it happened in Psycho, right?
Well,
obviously.
In the first 20 minutes, half hour,
but this is
still, that's a shocker.
It's a shocker, yeah. And it's it's he does some weird shit like that where he plays with the form, right?
He does this. If you're the kind of cineast who enjoys listening to commentary tracks on DVDs, find Jacques Tourneur's The Leopard Man, which is a Val Lewton production from 1943.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
And the commentary track is by William Friedkin. Now, why do you ask? Well, when you started, he just basically says, "Hi, I'm William Friedkin, and I'm doing this track because I love this movie." And then he just talks about the movie.
That's great.
And it's amazing.
Yeah, wow.
Right? And it's a great film because it's actually one of the first films.
Is it before Cat People?
No.
Oh,
no.
okay.
But it is one of the first horror films to actually have a serial killer in Hollywood cinema.
Oh.
It came out around the same time as Shadow of a Doubt,
right.
Hitchcock's film, which also has a serial killer. But this one is very creepy, and it's definitely more in that feel, more at least in Shadow of a Doubt, Joseph Cotton is kind of killing them for money and stuff. It's still a serial killer, kind of.
Yeah, because he kind of throws the money on it. Yeah. He doesn't care, really.
Exactly.
There's some other thing, yeah.
But in The Leopard Man, it's just pure, psychosis.
Wow.
It's great.
Well, there's Fritz Lang's M.
Of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that was German, so I guess
Yeah.
you mean Hollywood, right? Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So check that out.
Okay. Yeah. William Friedkin. So yeah, I just love his character. I think that's the way his movies were too. He was both he had a kind of warmth to him. He was also kind of arrogant and kind of defensive, but in a funny way, right? And it's really funny because the guy who wrote The Exorcist, William Peter Blatty, he was kind of like that too.
Yeah.
He was a little like old school, like tough guy kind of guy, and and he was also a comedy writer.
Yeah, he came from comedy, which is really, really interesting.
Yeah, didn't he? He wrote
A Shot in the Dark.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he wrote comedy TV, and I'm not sure what.
Yeah, I think he wrote for Bilko or something like that.
Yeah, and then he just decided, I'm going to write The Exorcist.
Yeah,
have you read it?
Yes, I have.
Jesus Christ.
So let's talk. I guess let's move on to just focusing on The Exorcist now, which I think people. I do remember, because I'm an old man. I remember when The Exorcist came out. I was a kid. I must have been 6 or something, 7 years old. But I remember people talking about this movie.
This movie changed Hollywood.
Yeah, and I remember catching glimpses of things, and I was scared of it before I even saw it, right? Because one time I remember when I was like in a movie theater to see something else, and we walked by the theater that was playing The Exorcist, and I could just hear some growling kinds of sounds,
wow.
and I was just like scared already, right? Yeah. And then I didn't see it until I was a teenager, like maybe 16 or 17, and when it first played on television.
Yeah, I saw it when I was a young teenager. I was probably only like 2 years old or so when it came out, but
right.
Yeah, as a kid who was into horror films, and I was so juiced to see it, and it scared the crap out of me.
When you saw it, how old were you?
I don't remember the first time I saw it.
Was it the time that they played it on TV?
Would have been on television.
Yeah, because it was a big deal. Like it was like ABC movie or whatever, right? And of course, it was cut quite severely cut down. But I remember when I watched it, so it had already built up in my head, and then I was like, okay, it's on TV, I'm gonna watch it. I was so scared, right? I actually put down like a sheet and a blanket on my parents' floor. Can I sleep with you, big 16-year-old guy? Because I couldn't sleep alone, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that one I've seen every horror movie, like a lot of the big ones, all the really scary ones, and a lot of them are scary, like Halloween or whatever, right? Scary, Alien is scary, like. But nothing penetrates the way.
It's a visceral.
Yeah, this one gets inside you. For some people, it's funny. I actually thought about this would make a really cool documentary, because I was so scared of The Exorcist that it came up in a lot of conversations throughout my life with people. Like just almost like I was.
I talk about it all the time.
Yeah, it's because you want to take a survey almost. Like because in my family. My sister was not that scared of The Exorcist, right? So then I realized, some people don't find this movie that scary.
I found this with the Blair Witch Project.
Yes, I don't find it scary on that level.
Okay.
But my friend Rui,
yeah.
He is shit scared of the Blair Witch.
I was so scared of that movie, I couldn't sleep. I saw it in a matinee, and I couldn't sleep for 2 nights. And, I saw it with my wife at the time, and she was like, what's the big deal? It wasn't scary at all.
Yeah.
And I started asking around, and I don't know if this means anything. It probably doesn't. But I started noticing that I found men seemed to be more frightened of the film than women, which made me wonder about...
Could be. That's an interesting study.
Because this is the so-called Blair Witch, if there was a sort of terror... Like a
witch as a...
a fear of the female.
That could be. I mean, that's
I don't know.
That's an interesting read. But it's more interesting that I did find it a scary movie, right? But it didn't bother me at all afterwards.
It hit me at my core.
Yeah,
it was.
But I find that fascinating, right? And same with The Exorcist. When something scares you to that level, you go, well, this is just universally scary, but it's really not. For a lot of people, they find like even my son Ishmael saw The Exorcist, and he said, yeah, it's. And I said, does it seems silly to you? He says, yeah, it's a little silly. So there are people
at the time when it came out, it scared everybody. I mean, this
Oh,
movie.
it was like, yeah, the ambulances would come to the theater. People were passing out.
Oh, a woman ran out of the theater into traffic.
Yeah.
And got hit by a car.
Yeah.
One woman sued Warner Brothers because she miscarried while watching the film.
Yes,
in the
that's
theater.
right. Yeah.
There's an interview with the manager of the University Theater in Toronto, which is now like a Pottery Barn or something. But it's still there. The facade is still there. And he said they had plumbers coming in every other day because the vomit was just backing up the toilets. And if you went into and it was sold out shows all day, every day.
Yeah.
And it was just a vomitorium throughout the theater, through the bathrooms. And, you know, if you go on YouTube, you can find like, you know, TV news segments where they're interviewing people who are like leaving the theater and they're like shaking.
Yeah.
This one woman is like, oh my God, I had to leave halfway through and my friend is still in there. You know,
yeah.
like,
I mean, I remember all of that.
You know, I saw it. I saw the movie for the first time in a theater in my early 20s. There was a midnight show, and I went to it. And they had to stop the screening partway through because somebody fainted.
Wow.
And it turned out it was this, like, beefy guy, and he was watching with his girlfriend in the early
she was
20s.
fine, yeah.
And she was fine, but he fainted. And you know what scene he fainted in?
With the needle.
Exactly.
Yeah, that
That's
apparently
that's the scene.
There was, so this is interesting. There was somebody who wrote an article about that, said that was mostly what people were passing out from.
Well, one of the things that makes The Exorcist so powerful, leading up to even just that part, is how slow it is to ramp up to the real horror of her possession.
It's like 40 minutes in or something, isn't it? Or 30 minutes in.
Yeah, there's a long setup. And it's actually, the setup is very similar to The French Connection, which is interesting because in The French Connection, if you remember, it opens in Marseille. And a French police officer is killed by Fernando Rey's henchman.
Yeah.
And so it starts off, there's a subtitle that says Marseille, and then blah, 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 and then the cop is killed. And then there's a subtitle that says Brooklyn. Right. And then we go into, Roy Scheider and Gene Hackman. At the beginning of The Exorcist, the first title is Iraq. Right. And you see Max von Sydow digging up the Pazuzu
totem.
Yeah. And then it cuts to Georgetown.
Right.
And it's a very similar setup. And I think there's actually a lot of similarities between both films.
Interesting.
That I think are echo some themes in Friedkin.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah.
What else did you kind of notice that was similar between those two?
Well, I think, both films are kind of like two people rooting out an evil that has come into themselves from another place. So in The French Connection, you've got Hackman and Scheider, which are not like the old priest and the young priest per se, but in a way, Hackman is kind of the tougher, older, wiser, and Roy Scheider is kind of like the sort of buddy who's following him around and helping him out. And Fernando Rey comes in as a drug smuggler, comes into the country, and so they're trying to get him out of there. And I think what also is interesting is that both films, are different genres, a police drama and a horror film. And certainly a rough, gritty style in a police drama is pretty commonplace now. But it wasn't then. No. And certainly that style was not happening in horror films. No. Which up until 1973, when The Exorcist came out, horror films tended to be highly stylized if they were well made. Right. Even something like Rosemary's Baby, which was a very big horror film in the late 60s. Yeah. Which takes place primarily in an apartment, and it's fairly naturalistic, but in terms of camera work and the dream sequences and stuff, it's extremely stylish. But The Exorcist is as grittily realistic as The French Connection.
So I mean, I think that The Exorcist has a much less gritty look, just because of it's in a more there's a lot to talk about, but I mean the fact that they're in this kind of a slightly upscale neighborhood, in this like very, very expensive looking townhome, right? Yeah. And the mother, Ellen Burstyn, is an actress and a successful one, like a star, right? Yeah. So,
yeah, the milieu is very different.
Yeah, it's got actually a bit more of a Kubrick-y feel at times, the way it's set up, especially in the opening. Like, there's a lot of static shots that are very composed and like
like that. Like Von Sydow was looking at the full size statue of the demon,
right? Yeah,
and the dogs are fighting in the background.
Oh yeah, that's great. That's great.
Incredible.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah,
yeah. But I mean, I think like one of the things about The Exorcist is that we like exactly, we're talking about fear, but it's like, well, what is it that is so scary about it, right? Because I mean, you think, well, it's not just about the fact that a little girl gets possessed by the devil. There's something deeper about why it scares a large percentage of people a lot, right? Like, as a matter of fact, like, I know that my father is a psychiatrist, right? When I was a kid, he told me that he had a patient who came to him because she was so afraid of The Exorcist.
Wow.
Yeah. And apparently that was fairly like I get it, because it's not just that I'm scared of it like in a fun way. It actually scared me a few times in my life because I've watched the movie a number of times, right? And like, so when I first saw it, I got really scared, and it scared me in a disturbing way. Like, where it was like, it wasn't just like, oh, that was a scary movie, I can get on with my life. It actually scared me in a disturbing way where I got a little obsessed with it. And then, I was like, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then, I couldn't keep, when I would go to bed, it would just come into my mind, it seemed out of my control. Right. And then it passed. I'm not sure why. And then I think like when I was like in my 30s, I went through a really rough patch. Right. And I remember going to see it on a Halloween screening. And I went through a couple of weeks of the same kind of thing. Oh my
God.
Yeah.
So what do you think it is? Like what?
Oh, I definitely think it for
the
me.
Religious part of it?
No. Well, so this is the thing. People, think it's a very religious movie. I don't necessarily agree with that part of it. I think the movie has a lot more to do with exactly when it was made, right? Like you have to think about, like, this is the time, like early 70s is when the women's movement is really starting to pick up steam, and it's a really threatening movement to the establishment, to the status quo, right? Who like their women basically, it's not a joke, it's the truth. Yeah, at home in the kitchen wearing high heels, cooking and vacuuming. So, not everybody was happy about that idea of women coming out of the kitchen and out of the home.
And a lot of people still aren't.
So this is why, in a weird way, I think, I haven't decided on this yet, but my feeling is that it's a right-wing movie. Like it essentially has a right-wing message in it, right? And I say that because the movie is about, again, like the mother, Ellen Burstyn's character, Chris McNeil. She's a successful actress. She's a single mom, okay? So she's divorced. She has this daughter who's prepubescent, just about to, start to discover, sex and that kind of thing, right?
And she's not sexualized at all in the film. I mean, a lot of early horror films with like teenage girls, or you think about slasher films, where that character is quite sexualized, inappropriately. But in The Exorcist, when you see Reagan before she's possessed, she's a very innocent, sort of straightforward.
Yeah, she looks more like a child, right? Yeah. That's why I said she's prepubescent. Like she's maybe like, she seems to me to be about like 13, or something, right? And but the interesting thing is that the what you notice in the movie is that Ellen Burstyn's character, who is doing a movie in Washington, that's why they're staying there in Georgetown. They show us, Friedkin shows a scene of the movie, and it's in the scene that they're shooting in the movie within the movie. It's an ERA, like a protest. And her character is like the lead of that group with picket signs and stuff like that. So it's already indicated, right, that this is...
Yeah, but do you remember, like, off camera, she's talking to the director, and she says something like, what is this, the Disney version of Ho Chi Minh?
Right, yeah. Yeah.
So her as a person is disdainful of the subject matter.
Yeah, I think she's more like she's living it, and I don't know, that's an interesting point. I didn't necessarily see it as her not liking the subject matter, but more just maybe the whole, the cynicism of being in that business, right?
Right.
But it's interesting that, like, she's immediately associated with the woman's movement, right? And she's a single mom, and she's a very good mom, and she's she's got money, she's got agency,
Mm-hmm.
and
she doesn't need a man in her life.
No, and immediately with Reagan, the shit starts to happen, like the bed moving and all that. When she starts talking about this character, it's all based on the missing dad, right? Mm-hmm. This Captain Howdy character, and then the dad doesn't call her on her birthday.
Mm-hmm. That's when things
start, right? And it's like that idea, and you just hear her, Ellen Burstyn just yelling at the dad, like, look what you did, blah blah blah. You see her Reagan outside, she's hearing it, right?
She's hearing it, yeah.
And so there's this feeling like for me, the ideology of the film is all about the missing father. I'm not saying I necessarily disagree with this in a psychoanalytic structure, mm-hmm. but I'm just saying, like, it points towards this idea that this new kind of family is the problem. That's where the evil starts, because your child will get possessed by liberal ideas, right? Like by progressive ideas, like being free with their sexuality, being outspoken.
Open the door to the devil.
Exactly, because all the things that Reagan goes through are basically just horrific portrayals of, getting your period, learning about sex for the first time. It's seeing this idea of a girl growing into being a young woman as an empowering possibility, as actually a horror. Mm-hmm. It's something that actually is horrific
and just destroys the family unit.
Exactly. And of course, what do they have to do? They have to bring in a father.
Yeah.
And not just
fathers.
one. Yeah. They have to have both
an old priest
and a young priest. And it's all about the restoration of the phallic, right? And that would restore order and eliminate the evil, right?
One of the interesting things about the novel, I don't know if you remember, is that, and the novel hews very, very close to the film, or vice versa. But in the novel, Ellen Burstyn had a son who died as a young child. And
right.
That sort of precipitates the divorce between the two parents.
Right.
And I thought that's an added disillusion of the family unit.
Right. I mean, I think that in the book, it's that kind of almost is like a bit of a red herring in a sense,
Yeah.
But I mean, it's been many, many years since I read the book, so I don't remember it that well. I read it when I was a teenager. But I mean, I just think that's why people who are afraid of it, what's scary about okay, now let's talk about what's actually scary for me. What's scary for me, and I've analyzed this because I was telling you that, like, I was going to write a paper for City Action, mm-hmm. and so I did spend a while researching The Exorcist, right? And one of the things I found that really spoke to me was the demon. So once she gets possessed by the demon, it's a really horrific display, and that's the important word. Mm-hmm. It's not that for me as a person, it's not that I'm afraid of being possessed. I'm afraid of having to see somebody else get possessed. Right?
It's very visual.
It's the display of it's that idea of performance, right? Because it's interesting that yes, Reagan is implicated in a murder, right? In that director's murder, but it's vague because you don't get details. Like, he went up to the room, he could have slid, he could have fallen out of the window. I don't know, right?
Right. You never see it.
You never see it, and it's whatever. But I mean, essentially, it's not like a serial killer movie. It's not like a monster movie that way, where the monster is stalking people or out there, you're not safe on the streets. It's all contained in this one room, in this one person, right? And so it's not about a threat to the community. It's a threat to what is being done to this girl is the threat. It's that you have to watch it, right? And what are you watching? You're watching the most vile, abject, the lowest form of bestial humanity. Right? And
which she expresses throughout her possession.
Yeah.
Her language and behavior.
She calls her the sow, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, yeah. And it's like, she like, has sex with a crucifix, right?
Yeah.
But it's also, she's
like
bleeding. It's like menstrual blood, right?
And then she grabs her mother's face and
puts it down there.
Says,
yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you could not make this film today.
No, you could not.
No way.
But it's like to me, I see all of that. If you just bring everything away from the horror elements, and you talk about, the way a teenager might talk to their mom, right?
Yeah.
I mean, without all the graphic shit around it, the rest of it, like I can imagine somebody saying like "bite me," or whatever, or like "fuck off" or whatever, right? I mean, the rebellious kid, right? And the sexualized rebellious girl, right? I mean, that's just something that's such a trope. And you got to remember that William Peter Blatty and, whatever. I mean, they're already kind of older guys when they're writing this. And they come from a time in the 50s, 40s, whatever. Women were more, a girl like this would be like a slut or like, just somebody who was from the wrong side of the tracks. Yeah. So this whole thing about, like, what we see as emancipation or like, women's lib, as they used to call it or whatever, what we see as kind of the progressive element in that is very threatening to a lot of people, right? And that's where I think the religion comes into it, right?
Yeah, I think faith is a big part of it too. Again, not for me per se, but I think the real key to how, the demon comes in is Father Karras. Because right off the top, without even meeting Reagan for the first time, he's questioning his faith,
right?
Because he's a psychiatrist. So here you have a man of medical science dealing with other priests and their problems, and that's already eroding his belief. And then there's the whole subplot with his mother and her failing health and feeling guilty, and and also when you look in, within the Ellen Burstyn's household, like there's one point where she finds a crucifix underneath Reagan's pillow,
right?
And is asked, well, where did you find this? We don't have anything like this in the house. So this is already like a atheistic home,
right?
And then next door, where the seminary is, you have a young priest who is losing his faith already,
right? And
then you've also, on top of that, in the neighborhood, you have these church desecrations.
Oh, you're right. I totally forgot about that.
Which is a red herring, because at the beginning you think that that's somehow directly connected to the demon, but there's no evidence of that, and it doesn't really make any sense if you think about it. So they're just neighborhood vandals,
right?
But I think the whole thing speaks to a communal loss of faith in the entire milieu of the film. And, again, of course, it's like a post-Watergate world. It's Georgetown. It's in, the nation's capital. I think that all adds to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all true. I think that's it's also exactly like it fits very well with what I was saying, because it's like the turning of a society, like, towards a particular bent, like more progressive bent or whatever. There's always this kind of like religious contingent that will come really hard back on it, because the faith-based argument in the movie, anyway, to me is weak, because it supports the idea that this is evil, right? To me, I don't know that I understand that what the demon does is evil per se. There's there is something kind of revolutionary as well about the demon in Reagan, right? You could argue that the demon in Reagan is actually, there is no demon in Reagan, it's just Reagan, right?
Sure.
And like think of a group of women like Pussy Riot, right?
Right.
Like, like just a punk girl, right? Like just like Nancy Spungen kind of thing, right? You know what I mean? Like I don't know, but, besides the vomiting and the head turning, and a few gross things.
Those little things.
Yeah, but the rest of it's just a lot of like nasty, like just contemptuous, full of like full of like vile, disgusting things.
I mean,
right?
there was a case, a real life case in Europe, not recently, but of a girl who they thought was possessed, and she ended up dying. And I don't remember the details of the case. It was in Scandinavia.
Oh wow!
And it was a super religious. Yeah, I know. The company I work for, Mongrel Media, released a film version of what that happened.
Oh, really?
Called Requiem. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, starring Sandra Hüller as the girl. And but anyway, yeah. So she was obviously serious mental health issues, but part of it was that the family was so religious that they were convinced it was an exorcism, and that fed the girl's belief that she was possessed.
Right.
And that just got worse and worse and worse, and then finally, due to malnutrition and dehydration, the teenage girl died.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah. And then the priest and the parents all went to jail.
Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, because I mean that's the thing, right? I mean, it's
so yes, and of course in The Exorcist, Father Karras immediately is like, he meets Reagan, and even after one meeting, he says, I don't think she's possessed. I think this is about psychiatry. But what's also really interesting about the film is that it's also a threat to medical science because there's this whole long lead up, like I said before, 40 minutes of her being at the hospital and going through these tests and all these doctors talking.
Yeah.
And then they finally say, you should see an exorcist. Not because they think that she's possessed, but because they have nothing else is working.
Right.
So we have a failure of medical science as well. We have a failure of, criminal science in a way because the detective
Lee J. Cobb,
who's wonderful in the movie, but he is bumbling around trying to figure out.
Yeah, he's lost. Yeah,
but he's lost.
Yeah,
no idea. And it also occurred to me while we were talking that the loss of faith that Father Karras has is echoed in very, very subtle ways by the other religious characters in the film as well. So you have the other priest, who, none of the priests act like priests that we think of. They all seem like just regular people.
Yeah, they're like,
they're just, so the other priest, I forget the character's name, but he's singing show tunes at the party.
Right.
And drinking scotch with Father Karras and hanging out and all this stuff.
Oh, when she comes down to pee on the carpet?
Yeah. And he comes across as gay.
Right.
Not to use a stereotype, but that's the feeling.
I think that's it's sort of like they're part of a cocktail party set, the priests. Yeah.
Right.
Kind of like in the Ice Storm. Although that guy was horrible, but
and even so there's a scene where they're trying to decide, the cardinal or somebody is trying to decide whether they're going to go get Max von Sydow over here to help with this exorcism.
Right. And
the two guys are talking. It's a bishop and somebody else in this ornate room. And one of them asks, well, has he done this before? And he goes, yeah, he did an exorcist before and it damn near killed him.
Right.
So these are like bishops and cardinals or whatever. And they're using words like damn in just regular conversation.
Right.
So they're not talking like in pious terms. They're talking like regular guys.
Yeah, they're just regular modern guys.
But they're using words like damn.
Yeah.
Casually without thinking.
Right.
And that tells me that, between, the detective, between the doctors, between the, not only the two main priests, but all the religious figures in the film, there is a lack of confidence in what they're doing. There's a lack in their belief in their own ideologies. And of course, as you point out, the destruction of the traditional family unit.
Yeah.
These all are the conduits through which.
Right.
And of course, the big conduit is Max von Sydow finding the little totem in Iraq and saying, "Oh, this looks cool."
Yeah, well, because Max von Sydow is the phallus, right, in the movie, and he finds the phallus, right? I mean, it's clear, right? I mean,
well, when you look at the full statue,
yeah,
it's got this massive erection.
It does,
it's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, that's it's not even that. It's obvious to me, right? It's like, in some ways that's the weakness of the film, is that it's a little obvious to me about like, reinsert the phallus, right, and the patriarchy, and and you restore a kind of order, because the idea there is that without it's like the age old argument about religion, needing God, because Dostoevsky, right? Without God, everything is permitted, right? Mm-hmm. So it's that idea that whether God is real or not is not the point. You need to have some again, totemic figure that everything revolves around, right? Otherwise, how do we?
It's chaos.
Otherwise, yeah. How do we?
How do you know what's right and wrong?
Yeah. How do you know what by what authority, right? So that's what the Max von Sydow character introduces, right? Or reintroduces into the family structure, right? Mm-hmm. And then the sacrifice, right? Which is this is maybe too theoretical to get into right now, but if you think about it, the sacrifice goes back to the crucifixion, because that's a sacrifice. It goes back even further to that, to Abraham and Isaac, right? So it's a reinstatement of not just the religion. It's the religion used as the origin story for the traditional patriarchal society, and that's what needs to happen. And if that's your read of it, that's my read of it, then you have to understand all of the devil's, in quotes, actions are really anti-establishment,
right?
You know what I mean? So in a way, that's what
Zuzu is the anarchist getting in there to destroy.
He was a deadhead.
This horrible, patriarchal order.
Well, that's it. I mean, it's the anarchy, it's the chaos, it's the taboo, right? Mm-hmm. Like all of the taboos that. So what's interesting for me is, as frightening as I find The Exorcist, the more I kind of looked into it, the more I understood the demon does have an emancipatory function in some ways, right? If you think about it that way, right? If you think about, what would have happened if they just kind of let her be, who knows, right? I'm saying that in a way, that's the way I can imagine some like 60-year-old from 1969 looking at hippie girls, for example. Right. They probably saw something very similar to what The Exorcist looks like.
Well, I don't know how old William Peter Blatty was. I mean, Friedkin would have only been.
Well, I'm just talking about like anybody at 60 years old in that society, in American society in the late 60s, having to see like barefoot girls in jeans wearing halter tops, kind of being hippie. Like, you must have been like, this is horrific.
Like Brad Pitt in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Exactly.
Kind of freaking out.
Yeah. Well, with her dirty feet. Yeah. So that's it. That's all I got to say. No, I mean, I think that's in a way why it touched so many people too. Like it resonated so deeply, because every time there's a movie that hits the zeitgeist like that, I find that there's always some political underpinnings in there, right?
It really did. It was interesting how, the Catholic Church got an increase in people who wanted to join congregations after The Exorcist.
Yeah.
Because they were like, oh my God, I need to be a Catholic now. Make sure this doesn't happen to me.
I know, that's crazy.
It's bizarre.
I know, but it's pretty amazing.
And a lot of priests really liked the film.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, because it shows the priests in a good light.
Well, it's kind of like it's a faith-based film.
It is. It's a bit of a PSA for the church. Yeah.
I mean, they win at the end.
They
die, but
you got to have the sacrifice. But I mean, I do think there's other things like about The Exorcist that for me also, I find that like Friedkin is often unnerving in other movies too. It's something to do. It's something to do with the way he structures the scene, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's just something uncomfortable. And I remember reading somewhere about the sound guy on The Exorcist, who said that he actually used subliminally in the movie, sort of just below hearing level, the sound of bees
Right.
in a drone.
Yeah.
And you can't perceive it, but he said it makes you feel kind of just uncomfortable, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think that he did weird things like that with sound. You know, the thing about him...
When she hears the rats in the attic, so to speak,
yeah,
it's a weird noise.
Yeah. Do you hear...
Like, nobody would actually think that was a rat. They'd call the police immediately.
Yeah, it sounds like a clink or something, right?
It's like
yeah.
Deep. The other, I talked a little bit about Friedkin's controversial work with Ellen Burstyn with the back thing. The other thing he did was
he slapped the priest, right?
Yes. He slapped the priest. So at the end, when Father Karras is dying at the bottom of the Exorcist steps,
yep,
and Father O'Malley, I remember now, Father O'Malley is like holding him, and Friedkin could not get the right emotion out of the actor playing O'Malley because that actor wasn't an actor. That was actually him.
He was really a priest.
That was him. Yeah. He was a real priest.
Yeah.
And so right before one take, he slapped him hard across the face. And he was so shocked and upset and started to tear up. And then he said, roll camera.
Yeah.
And that was the shot they got.
Those were the days.
Yeah. Jesus Christ.
You could slap a guy.
The other thing he did was the voice of the demon in possessing Regan is actually by a female actor named Mercedes McCambridge.
Yeah, right. Johnny Guitar.
Yeah. And all the what was the movie with Broderick Crawford? All the King's Men. So in All the King's Men she was in. Yeah, I think she got an Oscar for that one.
Oh, cool.
But anyway, so Mercedes McCambridge in later years became an alcoholic. And in order to get the right vocal tones and the right thing, Friedkin was feeding her booze between takes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh.
And he knew. But he just wanted that extra, something special.
Those were the days. just you know what? Fucking get her drunk. Hurry up. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
Awful.
That's awful. Yeah, I mean, but look, The Exorcist has endured for 50 years.
Yeah.
I mean, this new one just came out. I guess it's just coming out now, right?
It just opened on Friday. Reviews are disastrous.
I mean, they keep they keep trying to hit that Exorcist like thing, and they can't do it. Like Exorcist.
There's even a TV show. Did you ever see the TV show?
Yeah, I never saw
terrible.
the TV show. Yeah, I mean there was the Exorcist 3.
It was pretty good.
Was pretty fucking scary, but it was directed by William Peter Blatty.
Yeah,
so in a way,
and it had George C. Scott. I mean, he's scary right off the top.
Well,
Jason Miller's in it as well.
Yeah, I know. He's in the cell, right? He's the he's the demon.
Yeah, Exorcist 3 is really notable only for having one of the best jump scares
ever.
Oh my god, the whole I was saw it in the theater when I was younger.
Everybody's gasped, right?
Everybody's screamed.
Yeah. I think I was home alone watching it. I was like,
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's not great, but
it's the best out of any of the other of the sequel Exorcists.
For
because I mean.
And I mean, it was so big. It caught so many Exorcist knockoffs in the 70s that...
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, there was like so many... There was like a billion demon-possessed, kind of things. So none of those were scary.
There was even some, like, low-budget, like, giallo horror films about slashers or whatever that bombed. And so the distributors in the U.S. who were like, third-rate, hack guys... They would cut it up and put in extra footage in a hospital or something to make it look like a subplot of a possessed girl.
Oh my god!
Yeah, I forget which movie it was. It's like,
I remember
constantly or we were talking earlier about Larry Cohen's film God Told Me To.
Yeah,
which bombed completely when it came out. So they just gave it a new title and called it Demon.
Oh yeah, Demon. That's right.
And there's nothing to do with the movie. There's no demon.
Yeah.
They just called it Demon and stuck it back.
Well, I guess there's that guy in the basement. There's like the devil, right?
Guy in the basement.
Remember at the end, there's that
the house falling and everything. No, he's not. He's like Christ.
Yeah, but he's on fire, right?
Yeah, but he's
so it's kind of
kind of flipped. Well, Tony LoBianco is kind of a devil.
Yeah, it's playing with those two sides. Yeah.
Anyway, it's a whole other episode.
Yeah. Are you gonna watch The Exorcist this year?
I probably not, just because I watched it. I rewatched it about 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a fucking beautifully made movie. I really do. Like, you were talking earlier about like how it starts off, right? Yeah, and I noticed this too about all of Friedkin's movies. He's got that thing where he's very interested in the subject he's shooting, and so he doesn't gloss over details, right?
He's a very detail oriented.
He's very detail oriented, and it makes the world of the film very inhabitable and very real, right? And so even when crazy shit's happening, it's believable, right? Because the whole opening, you're just kind of like, yeah, this is just a regular.
It's like a regular movie.
Yeah.
These little things happen. The rats in the attic.
Yeah.
The Ouija board.
But you're like you said, like even the way the priests are kind of just talking like everyday regular folk, you know, and it's like all of the dialogue is there's an almost documentary feel to it.
That's
that
kind of what I meant
remove.
about that grittiness. That
Yeah.
you see, like the French Connection is very documentary-like as well.
It is, but it's got way more grit because it's out. I guess because it's dirtier. Whereas,
it's
but
New
you're
York
right.
in
I mean,
the 70s.
there's that kind of reportage style of his where he's just kind of like watching, right?
Yeah.
I don't feel like
the physical effects are so real. You know, like
the
refrigerated
effects are great. Although Ishmael disagreed, he said that the head turning looked really fake, but.
Not for the time.
Yeah, enough for the time. And I still find that whole thing really scary, right? Again, it's the display, right? You have to think about it. Like, why does her head turn around? What's the point, right? But it's just to do something to scare you, right? So it's really kind of like I remember one of Jason Miller's lines is, "That's a simple trick" or something like that, right? It's like. You do kind of say, well, you know, it's getting more and more intense, but what's this thing really doing?
But then again,
it's
there's a part where he says, if you're so powerful, why don't you just undo your straps? And he says, that would be too vulgar a display of power.
Wow. Okay, good night. I have had that fear that I was just going to come downstairs, you know, from upstairs and it'll just be standing there, hi, you know.
It's a wonderful day for an exorcism.
Why are you doing teenage?
Sorry. Oh boy.
Yes.
No, it's one. I mean, it's just stunning. It's one of I like horror films a lot, and it's definitely one of my top 3.
Well, definitely the only one that's
horror
scared
films.
me. I've seen all of them.
I've said yeah.
I'm trying to think of what the next scariest movie for me was. Oh, Hereditary came close.
Hereditary is pretty damn scary.
Yikes.
Well, people ask me what's your favorite horror film, and I say it's one of 3 because they're each different. So for me, the scariest movie is The Exorcist.
Yeah, I agree.
The most beautiful horror film is Bride of Frankenstein.
Oh, yeah.
And probably the greatest horror movie is probably Psycho.
Yeah, okay.
So those are that's my Father, Son, and Holy Ghost of horror cinema.
I totally see that. See that. You know,
and there are other ones that Texas Chainsaw Massacre is very visceral. It's so unsettling. Like it's horror in a way that's.
I don't even want to think about that one. That one, when I think
scary,
about it,
but
makes
it's
me
also
sick.
like it's nauseating, like in a deeply traumatic way.
Yeah, but it's very good. That's the thing I hate about it.
Incredibly
it's such a good movie, but I hate it because it's so disturbing.
Yeah.
Yeah, those ones are like like there's a difference between like horror and disturbing for me, right? Like
so
I because I could find something scary in a kind of just like childlike way, like ooh, that's scary, right?
Right.
But it doesn't disturb me the way like funny games disturb me.
So Stephen King wrote about how there's a difference between horror and terror, and he said that most horror movies are actually quote unquote terror movies. Because terror is something that scares you, right? It's like a jump scare or makes you like really nervous or whatever. But he said true horror is very rare in films and novels.
Okay.
But that's where it's the horror that's disturbing. So for King, a movie like say Alien maybe would be a terror movie. Right, or Friday the 13th or something. Right. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a horror movie.
Yeah, you take it with you. Yeah.
Night of the Living Dead is a horror movie,
Yeah.
Because they're just disturbing on multiple levels. I think The Exorcist is as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think The Exorcist kind of is
very
both,
deep,
but and that's the thing. That's the other thing about Friedkin is that like he always put, like, and we were saying this earlier about him, just as, generally speaking, as a style, he always put a little bit of art film or art cinema in his movies, right? And I think that's what that opening of The Exorcist especially is like. It's like there's a dispassionate kind of very formalized way of looking that is almost like an art film. It's almost like it could be just a relationship film or something.
It's slowly paced.
Yeah,
it's very
and it's definitely got that thing. Yeah. But I mean,
and Max von Sydow, who up to that point had
only been known in Bergman films.
Was that his first English language movie?
I think it was. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, he was like, that's the thing about Friedkin. I really encourage people to watch, like, To Live and Die in L.A. Killer Joe was really good. And find Sorcerer, watch it. The thing about this is watching his movies. His movies are not hard to watch, but they do seem like they're from a bygone era. Yeah. Whereas someone like Scorsese is keeping contemporary, right? Friedkin does seem of his time, or maybe his style was just sort of like,
it's a little timeless in a way.
It is, but I mean,
a bit of old Hollywood there, a bit of like new Hollywood. I mean, Friedkin was obviously a new Hollywood person.
He was, but he was very influenced by European cinema. Like, that's evident, in his movies, right? So, but anyway, and definitely look up some of his interviews there. He's a fascinating guy to listen to.
Oh, yeah.
Any other good horror movies that you've seen recently?
I went to see. So I like to spend October watching a lot of horror films.
Yes.
I went to the theater at the Review. They screened early 2000s horror film called The Others, starring Nicole Kidman.
Oh yeah, I love that one.
Spanish filmmaker.
Yeah, that's the one where it's like the period piece, right?
Yeah, it's 1945 or something. And
and she has the kids.
She's got 2 young kids.
Civil War, right?
No, World War II.
Oh, it's World War II, right?
1945.
But the husband comes back as a ghost, right?
Back. Yeah. Well, maybe as a ghost.
Oh, they're all that's right. Yeah.
Spoilers, but
it was good.
It's good. Yeah. And this was one. It was actually quite busy. It was busier than I thought it would be because it's not a film I thought was very contemporary or popular.
Maybe it's good.
But I had never seen it before, so I wanted to go. And there's a couple of jump scares there. Boy, that whole theater went like ballistic.
Yeah,
it was really good. And you know what? That was got to be like one of Nicole Kidman's like greatest performances.
She was really good in it. Yeah,
incredible.
Yeah.
So,
so that's our take on William Friedkin and especially The Exorcist.
See you out there in the dark.
No, you won't.